What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kilo Loco, and today we're going to be working with iOS. So in this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to get up and running with Sign In with Apple, but we're going to be using that new hotness, the SwiftUI, right? Oh yes. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump right on in. So as you can see, we're starting off with just a completely blank SwiftUI project, and nothing special is going on here. So the very first thing that we need to do, head up over to that blue file up there, head to your signing and capabilities. We're gonna hit the little plus right here, capabilities. We're gonna search for sign. We're gonna find sign in with Apple. We're gonna click it. We're gonna double click it. We're gonna wait for this to resolve. Now, if you run into any errors or you have like some type of fix it going on right here, just be on the lookout that it might be having to do with like your development profile. You may need to go to like appstoreconnect.apple.com and resolve any like tax issues or anything like that. You will need to be like an Apple developer in order to follow along. So just keep that in mind. So as you can see, we got that sign in with Apple right there looking all nice and juicy. We're gonna head over to our developer.apple.com portal. Sign in, you're gonna head over to the certificates, IDs, and those profiles. Head down to identifiers. We're gonna search through our identifiers because your boy be coding up a whole lot of nothing. And we're gonna search for my bundle ID, which is SwiftUI SIWA, just like so. And there it is. So as you can see, I got my little prototype project down there, but this is the one that we're looking for right here, this bad boy. You'll actually be able to see it matches right here. No fast ones today. No, thank you. All right, so go ahead and select that one. We're gonna make sure that we have sign in with Apple selected right here. It should already be selected for you. That's what Xcode was supposed to do if it knows how to do its job. If not, it's fired. But if it isn't, then make sure you do that. Then what we'll do is we'll head back over to keys, and we're gonna create a new key. So let me show you that. Let me slow down a little bit, right? Keys plus, right? Key name, sign in with Apple, and SwiftUI, right? No dashes, they don't like dashes. And we're gonna go down, select the one that makes sense, sign in with Apple. We'll head over to configure. We're going to select an app ID. Now you know, that's the one that makes sense, SIWA SwiftUI. So we select it, we save it, and we continue. And then we also register. So what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna download this key. You only get it once, and there we go. So now that we have it downloaded, what we're gonna do is we're gonna head back over to our app, and now we need to actually start implementing some of the UI, right? So head over to the content view, and we're going to first import Authentication Services. Once you have Authentication Services imported, now what you could do is you could throw that big sign in with Apple button, sign in with Apple like this, and it's going to take in a couple of different things. So we'll select the first one just so that you can see all the different things that it takes in. The first one is the label. So you can decide which label you want on the button. It doesn't really matter which one you choose. It just depends on what text that you're looking for. In my case, I'm just gonna go with sign in. You can choose sign up or continue, doesn't matter, like I said. And then we have the request, and then we have the completion. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create two separate functions that will have these same function signatures or closure signatures, whatever you wanna call it. And we'll handle the functionality in those functions just so that it's a little bit cleaner to see. All right, and there we go. So as you can see, we have our sign in with Apple button. I'm gonna show that sign in label. And then for the request, we're just gonna do this configure request right here function. Nothing implemented yet. And the same thing for the on completion. We're just gonna handle that completion, which is going to give us a result of AS authorization and error. I'm gonna cover all that in a bit, but let's first get the UI on the screen. Now, if you were thinking the way that I was thinking, where you can just like simply do something like this and then you can, you know, run it and see what the UI looks like, guess what? Apple thought it would be hilarious to not give the button an intrinsic size or give it a frame. Look at this. It just takes up the whole screen. Like, Like that's your UI now. So what we'll do is we're gonna go ahead and make it look a little bit sexier, throw a frame on it, give it a little bit of padding, and it'll look nicer. And just like that, it looks like somebody actually cares about UI here, and you have a nice, button right there, right? So got a little bit of padding, got a normal frame. The other thing that I want to show you real quick is what happens if you try to take a look at this thing in dark mode, because hey, you know what? It should just like automatically conform, right? Well, guess what? No, it doesn't. So what you actually have to do is update the actual UI based off of the color schema. So let's go ahead and do that as well. Alright, so as you can see, we have this new color scheme right here, and we are just grabbing it from the environment, and then we have the sign in with Apple button style modifier, which is going to check that color scheme. If it's equal to dark, then we'll set that white button, but if it's equal to light, then we'll set the black button. We're just using that little ternary operation right there to set that up. Now the other awesome thing that Apple thought would be hilarious to do is to actually make it so that this does not actually support the user updating their color scheme. So if you were to modify it, it wouldn't actually change colors. So what you would actually need to do is run it again, and then it will actually show the updated color scheme. So not sure what's going on over there. It's kind of like they threw it together and they're just like, whatever, it works. So then what we're gonna do is we're just gonna assume that it works, and then we're gonna move on from there. Now what we want to do is we want to focus on the request part, right? So we have our sign in with Apple button. We're going to do a request, and we're going to configure our request so that it gets back the different properties that we're interested in. So as you can see, it's going to pass in this AS authorization Apple ID request. So then what we can do is we just simply access the request, and then the actual request scopes that we're interested in. So in this case, we're going to be interested in both the full name and the email. As you can see, there's only 2 that you can access from, but there may be more in the future. I don't know. It's been like 2 years and they still haven't updated it, so I don't know if we're going to get any more properties. But right now we're just going to go ahead and grab the full name and the email. So that's just saying like, hey, when we get this information back, please give us these 2 different types of properties along with like the new generated user ID. Now if you're into crypto and you want to make sure that your data is more safe, then you could use a nonce. So you could do request.nonce, and then you could pass in your nonce string right here. But we're not going to be handling nonce because I don't really know a whole lot about it. But if you know more cryptographical ways of doing your stuff, then that's where you would do it. Now, over here in the handle method, we're going to actually be dealing with the result of that sign-in. So assuming that that sheet pops up and they go through, then we're going to get a success, which is going to be this AS authorization object. However, if the user can't sign in for whatever reason, or they just cancel and they close out the sheet, that's when we're going to be dealing with this error. So whenever you're working with the Swift result, easiest way to handle these cases is just to do a switch on that result. Alright, so as you can see, we have our auth result. We're going to just switch on the 2 cases. Either we're going to get a success and we'll have an auth object, or we're going to get a failure and we're going to have that error object. We're going to print for now. Then what we'll do is we'll do another switch statement, right? Another one. And we're just going to be switching off of the type of credentials that we're going to be receiving back. Now in this tutorial, we're actually going to be working with the regular standard sign-in auth credentials. But if you're working with the keychain and you want to just access the user's keychain to see if they can just simply sign in, you can work with the password credentials, but that we're not going to be touching that today. So just switch over the cases of possible credentials that you're going to be working with. All right, so as we can see here, let's stretch this out a little bit, just stretch it a little bit. All right, so now what we have is these Apple ID credentials, which is of type AS Authorization Apple ID credential, right? And the Apple ID credentials will give you all the information that you're interested in working with. So as you can see, you have the authorization code, the authorization scopes, if you want to work with those again, but we're not interested in those right now. We're actually only interested in the email, the full name, which is going to be of type person name components, and then we're also interested in the user object. So the user is actually going to be the user ID that is provided by Apple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new object which is going to actually hold each of those properties for me in a cleaner way. So I'll just do it right up here at the top just so that everything is in the same file and it's easier to understand and scroll back and forth as opposed to flipping pages. Alright, so as you can see here, we created this Apple user object, right? And it's going to have a user ID, first name, last name, and email. So this is like the two different fields that we were interested in, right? The full name and the email when we did the request. And I have this failable initializer right here, which is going to take in the credentials, which is what we just did a switch on down below right here. So remember, we're checking for this specific case, and as long as we get into that specific case, we'll have this type of credential object. Then what we're going to do is we're going to pull out the first name, last name, and email from these different properties right here. And if I'm not able to get any of these properties for any reason, then I'll just simply say that we could not create this object and we'll return nil. Now, whether you want to go about doing it this specific way, making this this object fail, is up to you. The reason why I'm doing it this way is so that we can save this Apple object, or this Apple user object, and I'm going to go a little bit more into that right now. But as you can see, we're just going to simply create the Apple user by filling in all the different properties. So as long as we have this Apple user, we also have all of these different properties. So let me show you why I actually, or let's talk about why I actually made it a failable initializer. When you do the Apple sign-in, the only time that you get back the full name and the email is during that very first sign-in. So that means that once this user signs in for the very first time, you have one chance to get back the email and their full name, and that's it. You miss that chance, it's gone forever. You can't get it unless they actually know how to remove their sign-in with Apple for this specific app, which I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes. But unless they know how to do that and they're aware of the problem, you're never going to get access to that full name and email through Apple sign-in. So what I recommend you to do is to actually save this to user defaults, which sounds crazy, right? Important information being saved to user defaults, generally not recommended, but in this specific case, I highly recommend it. And I recommend it because I've done this with the keychain before, to where I try to save the username and the email and the full name to the keychain, and for whatever reason the keychain failed and I never had access to those objects or those properties again. So what I would recommend is that you save it to user defaults, something that's safe to like assume that it's going to be saved, and then once you can confirm that you have the full name and email saved on your server or your database or whatever, then you go back and you clear out user defaults and you remove those values so that, you know, somebody can't just like break into somebody else's phone and get that information. So I am recommending using user defaults right here, but I am also recommending that you clear out user defaults after you do this approach, or after you confirm that you have that information saved somewhere else. So let's go ahead and create this Apple user. All right, so maybe you can follow along where I'm going with this. As you can see, we're going to try to create this Apple user object with our Apple ID credentials, and that will give us an Apple user. Next, what we want to do is we want to save our Apple user to user defaults just to make sure that we can hang on to that information until we can persist it somewhere else. And what we will do is we'll pass something in as the value, and the key will we'll cover that right now, but we need a key to retrieve it by, right? So what you actually need to do, because you can't save a struct into user defaults, is one thing that you can do is you can convert your Apple user into data, and you can do that by changing this Apple user into a codable object, right? So then you can just convert it, so now it's encodable and decodable, right? So we can encode it into data, and we can save that data into this value. So let's do that now. All right, so as you can see here, we have our Apple user being converted into Apple user data using the JSON encoder. And then we're just setting the value as that Apple user data. Now for the key, you could do it any number of ways to save it. One way could be like you can actually save it as Apple user, or you can save it as like just the Apple user ID. This way it's a little bit easier or a little bit more secure in a way, because the user ID is the only way that you can look it up. And if you can't get that user ID, then you can't look it up inside the app, or at least easily, right? You would have to, get the plist under the hood. But yeah, anyways, we're going to save this under the user ID for the Apple user, and then when we want to retrieve it, we just grab it by the Apple user ID. So now what we can do is we can just simply print out the fact that we saved this Apple user. All right, and there we go. So if everything works as expected, if we were able to sign in, get the cast the credentials as this Apple ID credentials, and then convert those into an Apple user, then we will actually have saved that object to user defaults and then printed out saved Apple user like so. So that's pretty much all we really need to do in order to see if this thing is working. And now let's go ahead and run it. And I actually have to run this on a real device because it doesn't work on the simulator. I think iOS 14 has a problem or something like that. But let's go ahead and run it on a real device and let's take a look. All right, so here's my real device right here. And what we'll do is, we're gonna make sure that it doesn't just disappear every time I click on something, right? So what we're gonna do is we're going to sign in with Apple, and then as you can see, it pulls up my information from here. You can just go ahead and change your name if you wanna do something like that. And then you can choose between whether you want it to be the real email, or if you want it to be this hidden email, which is one of the cool things about sign in with Apple. You hit continue, and it's going to do Face ID. And as you can see right here, we saved that Apple user. So now I have my first name, I have my last name, I have my email, and I have the user ID. So all the important information has been persisted to user defaults. So now what I want to show you is what happens if I were to try to sign in again. So, or actually we need to add a different print statement. So let me go down here and add another print statement. All right, so just to go over the print statement that I wanted to show off is now if we're not able to create this Apple user, it's because we're missing some type of fields. We're missing probably the email and the full name, right? But I'm gonna go ahead and print this out along with the email and the full name, and then also the user, which is just the ID. So what we should see is something like missing some fields, and then it'll be nil, and then the user ID. So let's run that again. All right, here we go. So I do sign in with Apple, I do continue, Face ID, and then we get back missing some fields, we get nil, we get optional, and then we get back the user ID, kind of pretty close to what I had stated. So as you can see, once you do sign in after that fact, you can no longer retrieve that that information. But if we were to do something like this, where we were to access user defaults and look up that value, we would be able to see that we're able to get back that Apple user. Alright, so as you can see, what we're doing now is we're going to look up user defaults. We're going to get the data for the specified key. Remember that we're saving the Apple user object under the user ID, which is this user property on the credentials. So now we have that user data, and then we simply decode it into an Apple user object, and we print out that user object. So let's go ahead and let me show you what I'm doing at least, right? Let's go ahead and do sign in with Apple one more time. We're going to do continue, Face ID, kaplow, and then as you can see, missing some fields, right? It didn't give it to us, but since we saved it to user defaults, we're able to look that information up. So once again, just make sure that you clear this away. So that's all you really need to know in order to get up and running with SwiftUI and sign in with Apple. Now, another thing that I want to show you while you're testing this, right? Because you may need to, you may mess up and you may not have caught those credentials right off the bat, right? What you would need to do is, if you wanted to test this again and just go through the whole round of testing, right, is you need to head over to settings, right? So you head over to settings, you go into your iCloud, you go to passwords and security, then you go up here where it says Apple or apps using Apple ID. And then down here at the bottom, you should see your app. So mine is the second to the last one, which is SIWA SwiftUI, not the proto one, but this one. I select this, then I do stop using, stop using, right? This is going to remove the app from your Apple ID. So now if you wanted to go through around and test it again, if you're like testing out saving this data to your database and then cleaning it up and stuff like that, that's what you need to do. So we'll head back over to the app. So now I should be signed out. So if I do sign in with Apple, as you can see, it presents the original information. And let's just kind of switch this up just so that we can make sure that we get different information. Right now this thing is taking over my screen, so I have to use my real keyboard. So kilo, loco, like that. And we'll do done. And this time I'll just use the real email, I guess, and we'll do continue. It's going to do Face ID. And now you can see that the Apple user has been saved, and I think that this is probably a different token. I wasn't paying attention, but it most likely is. And then you have the first name Kilo, last name Loco, and then you also have a different email as well. So that's how you go about testing. And that's pretty much all I really wanted to show you. So as you can see, it's really easy to get set up with sign in with Apple for SwiftUI. You just simply add in the sign in with Apple button. Once you imported Authentication Services, you specify the label, you handle the request, you configure it with whatever scopes you're interested in, then you handle the result. And like I said, you're going to want to make sure that you hang on to that information that you're requesting from the scopes. In our case, we were interested in full name and email, and we want to make sure that we're hanging on to that until it gets persisted into our database, wherever that might be, and we're going to hang on to it inside of user defaults until we do that. From there, you'll be able to essentially look it up by ID, and you'll be able to check whether the user is signed in or not. So that's going to be it for today. In the next video, I'm actually going to be showing you how to attempt to do auto sign in. So you would check the current auth status of your Apple ID and make sure that they're signed in before you actually show the sign in screen. So thank you for your time. That's going to be it. And I hope that you go out there and you keep coding passionately.